Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing capturing the storm, its execution, some problems that can arise with its execution, and how to fix those, a little bit of its history. So let's talk through the history part. So this technique is in the upper part of the system, pretty much, and like many of the techniques in the upper part of the system, they are part of forms. In this case, it's part of long 6, or form 6, depending on how you like to refer to it. The interesting thing about this is that the long version of the technique is part of the form. The ideal version is the middle version, but there's also a short version. Like we say a lot, there's a short, middle, and long version of the technique. In this case, it's flipped from what we normally see and not being the long version, but we are actually doing the middle version of the technique as the ideal phase. So let's talk through the attack now. The attack is an overhead club attack. So what we're doing is we're creating a circle, right? And with that circle, we have leverage. The reason why we need to worry about sticks is sticks are extension to our hand. If you notice, we only have this much for the hand, but we have the extra lever for the stick, so we have to worry about a lot of leverage. And this is why this comes into play for both this technique and two other techniques, obstructing the storm and calming the storms, which are directly related to this. So we have this overhead club attack, and obstructing the storm, the idea is to try and stop it, to stop that momentum coming forward, and thus take advantage of the fact that we're not letting them get more and more leverage as they come forward and speed. So the idea is to try and stop that hand prior to the shoulder or prior to the face. The horizontal version of this is calming the storm, where we do the exact same thing. So there are two problems that can arise here with trying to stop this. One is we didn't get there in time and it gets forward, and we then have to worry about that momentum being too much for us to deal with. And the other one being is where on the arm we're actually blocking. If we talk about the rules of Kenpo, if I'm on the outside of the arm, that means we're supposed to be at or above the elbow. Well, what happens if I don't catch that here? I then have to worry about eating an elbow. The way to compensate for that is we purposely choose to change up. So what does that mean? Instead of just staying here and trying to stick with the technique, we can then continue that motion forward. Keep in mind we have this idea that says we do not want to start an orbit that will reorbit back to hit us. We normally do that from first person's perspective. So we don't start things that then can reorbit back to us. So what we're now going to do is move it on to the opponent. So what we want to do is they're starting the orbit, and now what we're going to do is take that orbit and reorbit back to them. So the interesting part of how you're going to do this. So if I take my hand and I just try and slam this back into him, I can run into a problem here. I'm not controlling that grab, and that person can either A, switch hands, or B, just drop and move it into the environment. So how do we stop that from happening? Well, if I'm just coming here and I'm coming to get to this point, I have to worry about that. What I can do then is I can move my hand onto their hand. So if I was to get rid of their hand, this is exactly what I'm doing, but I'm doing it on top of their hand. Now there's a problem here. This is very weak. He could easily just pull right out of that, okay? And I have a second hand, but we have a general rule that says do not do 2 to 1. But in this case, we're gonna do an exception to that rule because of the fact that we're moving through and moving to a obscure area of this opponent. So if I were to just grab with my left hand, the same is true. He could then pull out of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these two hands, we're going to close that circle up, and we're going to make sure we slam that stick right back into them. Now there's 3 spots on that leg that we can hit. One would be the least destructive, the quadricep. The most destructive would be the knee, and the second one would be the shin. Why is it that we can choose? Because the fact that we have our hand here, we can move this both vertically, up and down, and we can also turn it side to side horizontally. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of all 3 of those possibilities, this one coming this way, this one going this way, and this one going this way, in order to slam that stick right into the opponent. We're probably going to choose this part to be safe to our opponent and not go to the most destructive other 2 areas. So if you see, that's why we're choosing that spot. So let's walk through that. So we're here, we get to this point anywhere on the arm for the margin for error plus X rule and slamming it in. Now our next problem that we're going to worry about here is what happens to us trying to get into that obscure zone. So we don't want to stay here on their center line because we have 4 weapons. But we do have the rear, which also gives them the 4 weapons, but we're behind them, so that's a better place to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to move to that spot. How we do it is important because we're coming through, we're hitting, and then we're going to continue through. If you notice, let's spin around so that you can see it from this side. I have a hole here that I'm going to try and pass through. I do not want to give up my lever and then go through that hole, because notice this person has a good lever, I do not. Kenpo is a leverage-based system. We want to try and get leverage over our opponent while maintaining our levers. So how do we go about doing that? So notice we started this rotation. We want to continue that rotation both horizontally and vertically so that we can do this. We want to try and get that hand as close as we can above the shoulder, which then forces them to bend over, and now notice what happens here. We have a nice big hole that we can just walk through. So we maintain our lever. So what we want to do here is, as we come through, make that hole nice and big and then walk through it. Now, we solve that part of the problem, but there's another part. What are we going to do with the stick? The easiest way to do the strip of the stick, and you're going to say, why are we going to strip the stick? Because Kenpo has an idea that we're always keeping these weapons under control. So we do it generally through checking, but another way to do this is through stripping. So we will then have the stick and not have to worry about it. So we get through here and we're going to do the strip. The easiest way to do it is, just as we were talking about going to the weak part of a grab, the weak part of the grab is here. So the easiest way to do this strip is to just slide your hand up, take this, and then strip it up. So let's get to this point so that you can see that. I'm getting through here. I can either just push it straight up, which would be okay, or I can flip it, which is the better way to do it. Now there's an extreme version of this, which takes it all the way to the other end, and then flips it this way, and it continues a torquing downward method of execution rather than an up and down version, which is more linear. The problem with that is we can now walk through what's going to happen with the short version of it. Because what happens if I get to do the strip and I don't quite get the hand right? Now the weapon's in the environment, and now we may say, A, I want to get out of here and I want to just continue out through this, or B, I want to come get this stick. So either way, that may automatically spur on the short version of this technique. There's one other consideration that you need to think about here. We get to this point, we get the stick, and we're really good at this. We got the stick really nice, but I now have the stick. Legally speaking, if I continue on this opponent, I could be considered the aggressor in this situation because I now have the stick, and I may have a legal obligation to stop. But there are other considerations that you might want to think about too. There may be multiple persons, there may be extenuating circumstances, and you want to continue on with this stick. That's what this technique assumes that's going to happen, but the short version of the stick is a legal way of getting out of this without continuing forward. Now with that taken into consideration, let's talk through the last piece. We get through here, we get the strip, and now we're going to step through and we're going to hit this opponent. I step this way purposely so you can see what's the wrong thing to do. Notice we were talking about center lines earlier. I have now exposed my center line to this opponent, and that means that they have their two left weapons in which they can hit us with. So how do we solve for that problem? The way we solve for that problem here is we get to this piece, we strip up, and we close our center line by stepping off and exposing a neutral bow situation to them rather than more of a horse situation to them, so that we can then close up that center line. We then strip straight up and then straight down, striking onto the back of that arm. This is where the middle version stops and the long version starts, where we do all the rest of the stuff that's in Form 6. But in our case, we're just going to set down, cross out, and cover. Okay, let's go back to our original position. Walk through this quick one more time, just reverting what we went over. So we want to obstruct this as much as possible, but didn't quite get it, or we missed our margin for error. So we then re-grab, use our vertical, horizontal, and their rotation to rotate back to hit them. Closing that circle, striking to any one of those three spots, opening a nice big circle for us, stepping through, stripping up, settling down, and hitting, making sure we close off our center line, cross out, and cover. So let's switch one more time. This time, one more time through without any explanation. Up. Hope this video helps you. Thank you very much.